one of the most important things about living in a community and being a part of the community and being a good citizen is that one needs to be familiar with the history of that community. Not only individual history, but community history. And what is known to us as the Indian Mound is a very, very, very important element, aspect of our history in the Central Georgia community. So I thought it would not be robbery to have two individuals on the show today who can really impart significant information about the mound and its history and its people, etc. Also the initiatives that are going on as it relates to making it a national park and making the community more familiar with how important it is, not only to be familiar with when you're not there, but to be there and to see it. So I think I struck gold today for two reasons. Seth Clark, who's one of the guests on my show today, and he's going to introduce himself, is just a small part of my excitement because I already know him. But Tracie Revis, who's a part of the, Tracie, I'm gonna get this wrong, so just hit me upside the head over there, is a part of the Creek Nation, I think.
A citizen of the Muskogee
He can
Nation.
correct me. So I'm glad we're gonna talk about the Indian Mound and all of the things that are related to it and what's going on. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the individuals who populated that mound and try to learn more about what it was before we came, before anybody else came really to that section of our community. So Trace, tell us a little bit about yourself, then talk a little bit about the history of that mound, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you again for having us. And we're really excited to talk about everything that relates to this topic. I love talking about my culture and my history and where I come from. So my name is Tracie Revis. I am originally from Oklahoma, is where I was born, but I have two tribes. I am Muskogee Creek and Uchee. And the Muskogee Creek Nation, which is what we talk about a lot around here, are the original ancestors of this area. We are the ancestors of the entire Southeast. While there were various tribes that came through within the middle Georgia area where we're at right now and over toward Alabama and a little farther over, that was Creek country, as they say. Well, just to explain that a little bit, because I am two tribes, but both of those tribes belong as a part of the nation. Way before any of the settlers came through in this area, we lived in what we call tribal towns or dawas. And those tribal towns were it was a town and there was a language of people that spoke, and those were Muskogean speaking people. And those people, they would live in different communities along the rivers because we lived off of the river. The river is how we provided for ourselves and protected ourselves. So when you look at the history of Georgia, you will find mounds built all along the corridor of a river, whether it's the Savannah River, the Oconee, the Ocmulgee, the Flint, and eventually down to the Chattahoochee or Chattahoochee. Along those rivers, you will find mounds built all along. Well, those were almost the capital city of different communities. And so the way we acknowledge each other is by our tribal town. That tribal town, specifically in this region along the Ocmulgee River, were the Lower Creek Confederacy. And so there was Togabuchee, there was Hitchity was farther south, Uchee, Broken Arrow, Casita, who else was a lot? Coweta. All of these tribal towns lived along the Ocmulgee River, and Uchee was one of them. Uchee is a separate tribe, separate language, as a language isolate. However, in the early
1600s, as there were settlers who started coming through the area, we came together because we had a common enemy and formed what has been called the Creek Confederacy. It was a way for us to come together with a common enemy and to join and support each other. So we would support each other in towns if we needed to go to war or we traded or anything that we did. And so amongst that Creek Confederacy became the Upper Creeks and the Lower Creeks. And so there were different tribal towns in the Upper Creeks and different towns in the Lower Creeks. And so we all kind of supported each other and lived among the river. The name Creek is actually a British nomenclature that came because we always lived along the riverways that they said they are the creek, the people that live amongst the creek or around the water. And so that's where the name came from. Today, we are those ancestors of those that were moved all the way from the coast, all the way to Ocmulgee, eventually Flint into the Chattahoochee, and then that was the last place of the large settlement before removal into Oklahoma in the 1830s. And so we've now been living in Oklahoma for the last 200 years. But what's amazing about that story is that those tribal towns, we retain those separate groups because that's how we would have been known. If I'm visiting with a person, the first thing I want to know about them is their tribal town. Where's the town that they come from? Because that's how they would identify. So today, my people come from the Yuchi, which was, they called us a tribal town, separate tribe, and Casita is my other side. Both of those are along the Lower Creek Confederacy. And we made it into Oklahoma. We set up our towns along those tribal towns. And those are the fireplaces that came from those towns that still exist today. So when we removed into Oklahoma, we took 45 different tribal towns with us that made it and set up their fires. Today, there are 16 of those tribal towns with the fires remaining, but there are more than that of the tribal towns that are still acknowledged today. So it's a direct history from here, but the way we were and the way we lived amongst here, these are the ancestors of those in this area. So at the mounds themselves, which I try to encourage people to stop calling them the Indian mounds, because they are the name of a people who live there. And when you relegate it to the Indians, you're taking away the identity of those people who live there. It is like saying that everyone who has one skin color is exactly the same, and they're not. And today there are 574 federally recognized tribes. There are over 500 native languages still spoken today, Muskogean being one, Yuchi being another, that are still spoken. And that is how we identify each other. We identify by the names of who we come from, our people, our ancestors, and not I'm one of the Indians. And so one of the things, me being in Georgia and really trying to help tell the story and help others learn, is to help teach people the proper way to talk about and educate people. And it's to no fault of anyone. You know, it was a bad time 200 years ago when we were removed. None of us were alive at that time. The history grew up as it was, and we are where we are today. But what makes it different and why it's important is what we learn from it today and what we do today. And it's whether we start acknowledging it by what it properly is. So I try to help people to say it's the Ocmulgee Mounds, which has ancestral heritage of the Muskogean and Yuchi people, but it is not just the Indian mounds.
Okay, so I mean, let's make this clear. Let's be clear. So your preference is for it to be called the Ocmulgee National Monument or the Ocmulgee Mounds rather than, for ever since I was a little boy, they've been calling it the Indian Mound. So I am
Right.
very happy that you are correcting that, because I think you deserve the right to be called, well, we want to be correct, So, I mean, if one wants to be correct, then he or she should call it the Ocmulgee Mounds. Seth, what do we call it now?
Right now, it is the Ocmulgee Mounds National Historical Park. But from 1936 to 2019, it was called the Ocmulgee National Monument. An act of Congress changed the name and expanded the amount of land that organizations like the one that Tracie and I run can buy. So in 2019, it went from the Ocmulgee National Monument to the Ocmulgee Mounds National Historical Park, and it expanded that boundary from 702 acres all the way to roughly 3,000 acres. And our organization has been charged with spearheading the purchase of that remaining 2,100 acres, in which we're well on our way. We've more than doubled the size of the park with land acquisition in the last year.
That is so awesome. So talk a little bit about the combined initiative in which you and Tracie are involved.
Sure. So our initiative is called the Ocmulgee National Park and Preserve Initiative, and it's been around for about 16 or 17 years. It was founded to begin the process, the long 20 to 30-year process, usually, of creating a national park in the American National Park Service. But this is just it's just the modern iteration of a number of a longstanding civic effort to do this. The first call to create a national park out of these sacred lands and out of the corridor of the fall line corridor going from north of the current Mounds site all the way down to Hawkinsville. So you capture this really wild ecosystem of wetlands and floodplains and really unique fauna and species. Calls to do that started in 1935. President Roosevelt answered that call in 1936 by creating the Ocmulgee National Monument. He did that without an act of Congress because he was allowed to. After he did that, he ordered an archaeological dig there. It's still to this day the largest archaeological dig in American history. At that time, the tribe, the ancestral tribe, the Muskogee Creek Nation, was not consulted. And that tribe, that archaeological dig went on until its abrupt stop whenever we entered World War II officially, when this region started sending people, the dig stopped. So in the early 40s. And there's never been a full archaeological excavation since then. There have been smaller ones in consultation with the tribe since then, but no full excavation. Also, what's been going on since that time are these civic organizations like the Ocmulgee National Park and Preserve Initiative, or we call it ONPPI because it's the longest name and of civic organizations in Macon. There was the Ocmulgee Valley Association, which pushed to create hunting federally managed hunting preserves downriver, which essentially is what we know of as Bond Swamp today, which is, they were successful in that. There have been other iterations like that, but our proposal is that we connect all of these federally and state managed lands, because the majority of the corridor between Macon, along the river between Macon and Hawkinsville, is under some sort of conservation or protection right now. And what we would like to do is be able to put all of this under a co-managed federal unit where we have state, tribal, and federal land managing entities co-manage this unit. And so that's our we're proposing that we go from what is now 2,800 acres of the National Historical Park to roughly 70,000 acres going downriver to just north of Hawkinsville. So that's what this partnership's mission is. And the reason we're working, I think Tracie eloquently described the reason we're working so closely with the Muskogee Creek Nation. This is the ancestral homeland of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and consultation practices in the creation of national park units is when you have something of this deep national and cultural significance, a consultation from 1,000 miles away isn't enough. And so the National Park Service has a huge emphasis on tribal co-management at the moment. Under Secretary Deb Holland, who is a Native American. The National Park Service Director, Chuck Sams, is also a Native American. They're very interested in the tribes having equal footing in management of national park units created on their watch. Those things and those aligning interests and our deep interest in understanding each other's communities. I mean, we have the ancient stewards of the land, and you have the current stewards of the land, and we have the shared love of this very important cultural and natural resource right here. And there's no need we shouldn't be working. There's no reason that we can't work together on this. So I think all of those things really describe why the relationship with the Muskogee Creek Nation and ONPPI and the greater Macon community just needed to come together. It was bigger than this park, but it's also how you create this park. So that's who we are.
And I would add, I'm so sorry, sir. The only thing I would add on that is that the nation actually owns land in the corridor, which is why we are a part of that co-management. It's not just for consultation because these are our ancestral homelands. It's that the nation has a strong initiative to make sure that we have a presence in this area. And so the nation actually owns land here in the corridor on the Ocmulgee River.
Yep, in the proposed national park unit study area.
Yeah, yeah, that is very important. So both of you, not all at the same time, because a lot of people are not really familiar what the mound itself entails. Talk a little bit about what one can expect to learn and to see at the mound.
So I think Seth and I look at it very differently. I look at it through a cultural lens. And then I think because, as you mentioned, it is such a part of Macon's history growing up, it has a different, I think those who have gone from their early childhood school trips have learned something different there. For me, culturally, I'll start with that. So the Ocmulgee River, by the way, Ocmulgee means boiling waters. It's the waters, it was a warm water river is what it was. And so it had a lot of meaning to us. And so that's where the name came from. And it is a Muskogean word. But that river itself, for me, is really important because that's how we survived and lived. So when I came back, the first time that I came back to the park and I walked, what I smelled are the same medicines and roots that we use in our culture today at our ceremonies and our practices. So I walk through and I smell home. I smell what it's like to go where my ancestors walked and talked and their voices were heard in that area and they lived and they thrived and survived. And so for me, I walk it and I see it differently. When you go out to the park itself, you will find the Earth Lodge, which is one of the first mounds that you find when you walk out past the visitor center. And that is a mound that you can actually walk inside of. And that mound was served as a meeting place for the men of the different towns to come in and take medicine, to talk about how they were going to approach the locals around. And they would call the different leaders, the Mikos, as they're called in our language, the Mikos from the different tribal towns would all come and they would sit inside there and they would visit and they would talk about what's going to happen. So that is where all decisions were made. So that is a very powerful area inside of there. But when you walk out from there, what you don't see is where we would have had a ceremonial square ground, where you would have seen the main fire that would have come from there and where the people would have danced and socialized and all the towns would have come to visit. And then you see the large, lesser and greater temple mounds, and that's where your upper leadership lived. So your Miko would have lived up there and his home would have been up there and he can see out and see down the corridor and see down the river. And it was an vantage point to protect and preserve people, but it was also a place that they could see anything coming. And so there's also the burial mound that is there. If certain people of significance passed, that they would have been buried inside of there. So you go out there, for us, what we see is this is almost a family cemetery. This is your childhood home, right? You think about that. You go back, your stories, your memories, the things that come. We find that when we smell or we see things or we encounter things. But the park itself, is mostly focused on the archaeological dig that occurred there. And so you don't feel all the culture that's connected to it. But, for me, that's how I see it. So I will walk it and I see it differently. That mound building that I was talking about, we took those mounds when we got into Oklahoma and recreated a mound. And that is where our tribal council meets today, inside of that building. And they meet inside of that because it's the same thing, that is such a significant part of how our leadership came together and they would sit and visit. And so that's what you'll see at the park. It's a beautiful place, but you may not understand exactly what it is. It's not a hill to run up and play on top of. It is where leadership would have lived. And those mounds are actually created by hand, by people taking baskets of dirt and moving things in a prehistoric time when they didn't have those tools, right? We didn't have bulldozers to go and move dirt and to make all of these things. And they built them with their blood, their sweat, their tears to create that, for that leadership to protect and provide for that community. And that community would have been all the way down corridor, down river, would have been thousands of people living with homes and different fires and different elements all throughout. So that's how I see it. Obviously, I didn't grow up in this area. And so for Seth, I think it's important because that is so much of an experience of what young kids get when they go out to the park.
That's outstanding. Well, I think that there is a way to do win-win with that scenario. And I think it's important because one thing about history, you cannot erase it. You can ignore it, but you can't erase it because it's there permanently. And I think it's important. And I'm sure that there is a way to divide the conjoining, if you please, of those two concepts, because it's very interesting just listening to your story. So we're almost out of time, but Seth, talk a little bit about how people can learn more about what's going on at the Mound, extend an invitation for people, to come and learn more about the Mound, the Mounds. And also, if you would, talk about maybe how the cultural element that Tracie mentioned can be incorporated into what's presented to the visitors, et cetera, who come out to view the Mound.
Sure. I think the first thing they can do to go out and visit is just to go out and get a feel for it. They can. I strongly recommend they check out the Ocmulgee Mounds Association. They're the technical friends partner of the philanthropic partner of the park. We are not. We're an advocacy organization that works to create Georgia's first national park. And what we need folks to do now is, if all of this sounds like something that this community, strengthening this partnership with the Muskogee Creek Nation, telling this story in a way that is truthful and fair and honors the history of who we all are, then I strongly suggest that folks look up how that process happens. National parks are not created overnight. Congress does it. This park is represented by 4 great people who support this idea. Senator Warnock, Senator Ossoff, Congressman Bishop, and Congressman Austin Scott support the expansion of this park, but they can't do it on their own. They're 4 folks in a body of 535 people. There is a study that's been going on for 3 years called the Special Resource Study that the National Park Service conducts. The National Park Service is on the end of that study, and then the National Park Service and the Secretary of Interior will issue recommendations, but it's still up to Congress. So what this means for our community, all of the being able to tell the story, being able to have not just a nominal process of consultation with the Muskogee Creek Nation, with these lands, this incredibly unique ecosystem that raised us all. In order for us to protect it further from industrialization, Congress has to do something this year, and that's not an easy lift for any of them. And even as good of partners as the representation that we have is. So I would recommend that folks educate themselves on the process, visit the Mound, see how special this place is, and just imagine the potential of it being a national park, and understanding the cultural significance of what I believe the cultural significance and the natural significance of this land, this very unique land that we're talking about, deserves the nation's most vaulted public lands designation. So over the next couple of years, you can, or next couple of months, follow our organization on Facebook and social media. Again, we're the Ocmulgee National Park and Preserve Initiative, and we'll be engaging a call to action, if you will, a request for help from our neighbors. And so far, when that request has happened, I cannot express how proud I am to be from this community, because when we had a public comment period 2 years ago, thousands of people from Middle Georgia spoke up in support of this idea. And now that we're on the tail end of that study and tail end of that process where Congress has to act, we're going to need everybody to do that again. But we'll be asking folks to do that in the next couple of months. But this is not just, the creation of a national park. This is really symbolizes a strengthening of a relationship that has not existed for a very long time, and a story that needs to be told in our region, and a partnership that, if we can create this park together with the Muskogee Creek Nation, can really mean something deep for this community, and also create a space that is in constant preservation where the story can actually be told. So that's what this means for this community.
That is so, so important. I am sure that there are literally thousands of people who would be interested in hearing more about that story. So I want Tracie to be bombarded with requests to come and speak, and I hope she doesn't mind, because I
I think
it's-
she's already bombarded, but let's ramp it up just a little bit more. We got a park to create.
We've got several organizations who would love to learn more about that.
Mhm.
School systems, social civic organizations, fraternities, sororities, and you name it. So what's that process in reaching out to you and Tracie to learn more and maybe to find out the process of getting one or both of you to come and talk to an organization?
You can email either one of us. My email is Seth@ocmulgeeland.com, and Tracie's is Tracie@ocmulgeeland.com, and Tracie is spelled Tracie. And you can also visit our website, ocmulgeepark.org. And there's a contact field in there that that goes straight to us as well.
This is a call to action. I'm your host, Alex Havisham, having interviewed Mr. Seth Clark, councilperson, Commissioner Seth Clark, and Miss Tracie Revis of the Creek Nation. I know I'm getting it wrong, but so we'll stroll it and get it right, Tracie, on the stream. And I'm so appreciative of both of you. And then I want to ask the community, to be a part of this process is important. Everybody's culture, everybody's history is important. But in order for us to have a better community, we need to cross-culturize. I coined that word, but it's okay. And learn more about each other, which will result in this being a better community. I'm going to personally, Tracie, call you and walk through with you, because I want to get that feel to the extent that I can of what you feel as it relates to visiting the park and the mound. This is a call to action. I'm your host, Alex Havisham. Have a great day.
www.makingblackpages.com.
Get ready, Central Georgia.
This is Alex Havisham, publisher of the Macon Middle Georgia Black Pages. I'm happy to inform the community, particularly business owners, that we're working on a new edition of the Macon Middle Georgia Black Pages and Resource Guide.
Coming soon.
So call today. You need to be a part of this.
Your resource guide to identify Black-owned businesses throughout Central Georgia.
You either get your free listen and or your ad in the upcoming edition.
We try to make it very easy through our book, electronic and digital formats, and social media. Reserve your ad space today.
Call 478-464-0074.
Visit our website at makingblackpages.com.
You cannot afford not to advertise.
Download the app.
The new Macon Middle Georgia Black Pages and Resource Guide is on the way.
Coming soon.